Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Someone sent me a picture of a quilt and they wanted to know if I could show them how to make it. And the answer is maybe. So I get a lot of pictures and requests. People send in quilts that they've seen and they want to make something that looks like that one, for instance. And I'm not familiar with all the quilt patterns. This one looks very interesting. I don't know what it's called or where it came from, but I'm pretty sure I can come up with something that has a similar feel. So I've done my back of the envelope sketch here with some numbers. So let's get some fabrics and see what we can come up with. I've written the pattern so that it will use a fat quarter bundle. And I like the oranges and yellows in the picture of the quilt, but I'm going to use K facet prints because they have even more zip. The only other thing we need is a background. And I have this whole beautiful line from North Cotton. These are called Toscana, and they have a little bit of color change. They make really good backgrounds for quilts because they're interesting. They're not too flat. And I want to go with a nice bright yellow. And we've got a lot of choices, and I think this one will be the best. We need 20 fat quarters, and that is what we have in this bundle here. And I always open them up and iron them nice and flat before I start cutting. I have everything all ironed here, and I like to cut 6, 7, 8 layers at a time. You may like to cut less, but everything is going to get cut exactly the same way. So I'm going to line this all up on here, and I'm going to cut it into 1.5 inch strips. So I'm going to get 11 of them all the way across here. Now I'm lining up my ruler with the lines on my cutting mat, and then I'm using a little hand weight, a little dumbbell, and that holds down my plastic ruler and helps keep it from sliding. So all of the fat quarters are cut into strips. And I'm going to make some strip units. So I'm going to make a strip unit that has 9 strips in it. And I'm going to want to put some lighter ones, or in my case, yellower ones, in the middle. So for the first strip unit, I'm going to use 3. Let's take these top 3. Then we're going to need a total of 6 that are darker. So let's see if we've got 6 here. Yeah, so we're going to make a strip unit with 3 of the darker ones, 3 of the lighter ones, and then 3 more of the darker ones. Now some of my strip units might end up with 4 yellows in the middle, and then I will have 3 darks on one side and 2 darks on the other. It doesn't really matter, but put your lighter ones in the middle and use a total of 9. Now let me tell you what a strip unit is, because you see that a lot of times in patterns. Basically, it's a series of strips that are sewn together. So we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam each time here. And I would recommend sewing one seam down and the next seam in the other direction. And that way, if you stretch things a little, or if your machine's tension is a little bit off, your whole strip unit will lay nice and flat. So I'm just going to grab these 2, and I'm going to try my best to not stretch anything. And I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam and go all the way down the edge. Now I like to finger press the seam to one side as I go. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to keep the seam going to the right, and I'm going to kind of hold it open with my hands and then take my fingernail or even the pad of your finger and draw it right down that seam. Once that's done, I'm going to set this back where it came from, and then this piece is going to go on next. But I don't want to stitch in the same direction. I'm going to want to stitch this way. So I'm going to flip it upside down and start at this end, and that way the direction of my stitching will be alternated all throughout the strip unit. Now I like to, when I'm done with this, open it up and put it right back where it came from so that I know I don't get these out of order. If you think you might get it flipped around and you won't remember, take a pin or a sticker or something and put it in the upper left corner. So I'm going to press this seam the same direction, then I'm going to sew on all the rest of these pieces. I have the first strip unit all stitched together. It's nice and colorful. And now, even though we finger pressed it, we're still going to want to iron it also. So I'm going to smooth it out with my hands, and I'm not going to worry too much that the ends are crooked because we have plenty of length to get what we're going to cut next. And I'm going to make sure those seams feel like they're going the right way, and I'm going to press it a little bit, first with a dry iron. Make sure those seams are all opened and there's no valleys in here. And then I'm going to get my yardstick or any sort of straight edge and make sure we are lined up nice and straight. And then I'm going to steam press it. Now we are going to cut this strip unit into 2 squares. So I'm just going to cut off a little bit of this excess on the one end, and I'm going to cut it into a 9.5 inch square. So I'm just measuring over 9.5, and I'm going to be able to get 2 of those out of this strip unit, even though my ends are kind of crooked here and not perfectly lined up. So here's what we've got now, 2 squares that are 9.5 inches. I finished all the strip units and I've got everything cut into squares. Now we need to cut some background, and that also gets cut into 9.5 inch squares. Now we're going to take one of each square here, put them right sides together, and we're going to stitch all the way around the edge. So we're going to go down this side first, and I'm going to stitch right off the end, 1/4 inch seam. I actually like to turn it around and do this side next. Do these 2 pieced sides first. Again, right down the edge. They're exactly the same size, so it's pretty easy sewing. And now I'm going to do these 2 non-pieced sides. Once you have all 4 sides stitched, it's best to iron this because sometimes as you stitch, it can get stretched a little. So let's steam it nice and flat. And now we want to cut along both diagonals. There's the first cut. If you're careful and don't move anything, you can just swing your ruler around and make both these cuts at the same time. So we cut through both those triangles. Now this is the square we have. It's half plain, half patchwork. Then we have another square here. It looks almost the same, but you'll notice the orientation of the strips. These are going this way and these are going that way. Now to iron these, put the patchwork side down, peel open the top, and press with your fingers a little bit so that this stays nice and straight. You don't want it bowing. You just want to press it a little bit towards the solid, then grab your iron and then give it a little steam. Now you're going to want to trim your dog ears off. That's that little extra piece there. And go ahead and make these blocks with all of your squares. Once you have all of these done, we're ready to build the block that's going to make our quilt. We need 8 of these where the strips are going up and down, and 8 where they're going side to side. So we're going to start with these up-down ones, and we're going to put 4 of them in the middle of a block. I'm going to put the bright yellow right in the middle. Now I'm going to take some of these side-to-side blocks, and we're going to put them around the edges. And I'm not going to worry about which fabrics are in which position. I'm just going to lay them where they go. When I'm all done, I may trade some of the blocks around if I don't like which fabrics are right next to themselves. So these go all around here and make little peaks. Now we're going to take the last 4 blocks and we're going to put the yellow in the yellow so it makes a nice long line there. And this is what our block is going to look like. So we end up with nice dark around the edges. We end up with some yellow in the middle here. And if you end up with 2 of the same print right next to themselves here, you can trade things around. I've got a little temporary table. Sometimes I will set up a little table next to my sewing machine when I need a little bit more space. Now, to sew the block together, we don't have to match anything except for the intersections between the blocks. So when this gets stitched to here, the seams do not line up on purpose, so there's no matching within here at all. You can just stitch right along there. So I'm going to make one row and press the seams to the right. Then I'm going to make the next row, press the seams to the left, to the right, to the left, and then sew all the rows together. I've got the 12 big blocks done. Now when we lay these out, we're going to get a little bit of a secondary pattern showing where these corners come together. So let me show you what that looks like. So we're going to get 4 of these nice triangular things making another small block in the middle here. So since there's only 12 blocks, we're going to have 3 blocks wide, 4 blocks long, stitch it up and get it on the quilting machine. The quilt is on the machine. It's nice and cheerful and bright. I really have 2 choices for thread colors. I'm either going to use this orange, which would show up very nicely on all of the yellow there, but I think I actually will use the yellow it's really the same color as the background. It's not going to show in here at all, but that's going to look really good when the quilt is done. I'm going to use a quilting pattern called Fidget. So here's what it looks like a little bit bigger. It's an all over squiggly design, and that's going to look really good on the bright colors of this quilt. I've got the whole quilt done. Really pleased with how it came out. Now we're calling this pattern Diamonds Squared because it looks a lot like we took these squares here out of the diamonds. It's amazing how a simple block, the procedure was very simple, made a very complex looking quilt. The fidget pattern looks really good on this yellow, and you can't see any of the thread in the prints. That's really fun. I used another K-facet print on the back side here. I love these big bold prints. This would look great if you just flipped the whole thing over. It turned out 69 by 92, so it's nice and big and pretty easy to make. Now, if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming videos, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm working on a quilt called Striped Squares. I'm going to use this fat quarter bundle of Moda Batiks. The pattern is also from Moda Fabrics, and it's my favorite kind of pattern, a free pattern. So if you go to our website, to Jordan Fabrics, we have a whole section of free patterns right here. And this one is called Stripey Squares. Click on it. And then you can open this up on your computer. You can print it off if you like, but all of the directions are right there. The pattern calls for 12 fat quarters, and then we need a background. We need 3 1/4 yards, and I'm going to use this nice white here because all of these different colors will stand out nicely against this clear white background. The first step is to iron these nice and flat, because if you have them pressed very, very flat, you will get more accurate cuts. Now I've got 6 layers here. I can cut 6 layers easily. If that's too thick for you, then only cut 4 or 2, whatever is comfortable for you. Now there's a nice cutting diagram included, and every fat quarter is going to get cut exactly the same way. Now it's pretty easy to get your cuts this way because you need 16 inches of your 18. But this way it's a little tight. We need 21 inches here. So I've very carefully on this side over here lined everything up so that when I cut those strips, I can get all 21 inches. So you want to be real careful before you start that you can get that width. I'm using my weight here to help hold down my plastic ruler. And we're going to do all of these first cuts. They are all 2 inches wide. So we're going to do 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 all the way across. I have all of the 2-inch cuts done. Now I'm going to turn my cutting board, and then I'm going to make one cut here to even everything off. Then I'm going to follow the cutting diagram here and get these different lengths. We've got some 2s, some 8s, some 11s, and some 5s. All of that patchwork is cut, and there's hardly any waste, which is very nice. Now, the background gets the exact same number of pieces and the exact same sizes as our batik pieces. But since it's yardage, the directions will give you a slightly different method for cutting it, but it's going to be cut exactly the same way. So I'm going to go ahead and get that cut. Everything's cut now, and I've pulled off the pieces for one of the block. Now the blocks are pretty easy to make, and I'm just going to lay this out so you can see what it's going to look like. We're going to put sides and then top and bottom. And this is all the same print, so that print is going to go all the way around. Then we're going to have white all the way around, and then we are going to have the opposite color. So my fat quarter bundle had about half of this plum color and half of the blues. So if I've got plum in the middle, I'm going to do blue on the outside. Your fat quarter set may be multicolored, so just try to get 2 different colors for here and for the outside. We'll start with the center here, these 3 pieces, and we'll just sew it in a row. Now with batiks, sometimes it's hard to tell what's the top and what's the back of the fabric. And our rule is, if you can't tell which is the top and which is the back, then it doesn't really matter. Sometimes, like this one here, there will be spots on it, and that to me is the back side, so I'm going to make sure I have that for my top. I'm going to press these seam allowances toward the dark fabric. So we will do that throughout the quilt. Every time you've got these two coming together, press those seams toward the dark side. Now this was from right here, so we're going to take these 2 pieces and sew them on to the top and bottom. Now it's exactly the right size, so if you're using your careful 1/4 inch seam allowance, each piece is going to fit on, and you can start finger pressing towards the dark as you go. This one's going to fit right on there. Now when you put this back here, it's square, so you can put it either way, but you want to put it back the way you had it laid out originally, which means these long pieces are going on the sides that have those little seams. Now be sure to iron this seam allowance toward the dark, so you've got to fold it in that way. That way we won't get any shadowing here when we're all done with the block. Now we'll put these guys on the top and bottom. Now we'll put the sides on. And now the top and bottom. And now the block is all done. Even though we finger pressed it as we were sewing, we are going to want to iron this. So you need to use a dry iron first and coax it back to square, because sometimes it will distort a little bit as you're sewing. So I'm just going to gently square it up as I go. Make sure those look, the logs or these strips look nice and straight. And you can just use your eyes. You don't have to measure or anything. It's going to be pretty true, but you can help a lot just with that iron. I've gone ahead and made half of the blocks for the quilt. So this is all the blocks that are colorful like this. Now all we have to make is some blocks that are made exactly the same way, but they start with dark in the middle. Then there's white, then there's a color, and they end with white. So I'm going to go ahead and get those stitched up. All of the blocks are done, and I'm ready to start laying out the quilt. So all we're going to do is use alternating blocks. So we're going to use one with the dark on the outside, and then one with the light on the outside. Then another one with dark, and another one with light. So I'm going to go ahead and get the whole thing laid out, and then we may trade some of the squares around so we get a nice color balance. Now all the blocks are laid out, and I didn't even look to see what color was going to end up where. I simply put a dark outside and a light outside. So once I get that done, then I will take a look at the whole quilt. And I don't like it because I've got this print, the same print, in blocks that are right next to each other. So I will start trading around a little bit. Now I traded, but look, it's still up next to the same kind of block. So I'm gonna have to go farther away, maybe here, because this was right next to that guy. So you can get kind of picky and end up trading and trading and trading. So don't look at it too closely. Just stand back and see if the overall view is what you like, and make sure you don't have two really close together right next to themselves. There's one more hint for laying out your blocks. Take all of your blocks that have light on the outside and put those long pieces on the top and bottom. Then take the blocks that have the dark on the outside and put the long pieces on the side. That way, when you stitch this seam here, you don't have to match anything in there. If we had it this way, it looks the same, it's perfectly fine, but I'm gonna have to make those intersections match. This way, I won't. I've got the quilt top all done, and it's loaded onto the quilting machine. Really liking how all the squares look. It's very balanced. So we need to pick a thread color. Now, I almost always like my thread to blend in and not show very much. So I'm pretty sure if I use this, the thread is really going to show on the white, and I don't think I'll like it. Same with this. It matches perfectly, but it's just not going to blend at all. Now, I could use white. That will blend really well in the white, but it's going to show up quite a bit on these dark blues. But if I go with this really light gray one, it's still going to look like white on the white, but it's a little less stark on the blue and the dark plum. So that's what we'll go with, this gray one. For the quilting pattern, I've picked one called Blooming Feathers. It looks flowery to me, even though I'm not sure these are actual flowers, but it has kind of a tropical feel to it, kind of a Polynesian feel, and that's what these batiks look like to me. So I think this will match really well with the quilt. I've got the Stripy Squares quilt all done. This is a fun one to make. It's 63 by 84, so it's nice and big already. And of course, it'd be really easy to make it bigger if you had extra fat quarters. You can also make this pattern with quarter yards. They don't have to be fat quarters. You can cut it just as easily from quarter yards. Now you can see the quilting just a little bit, which is what I like. I like just a shadow of quilting showing. The back is this nice batik with these, I think they're birds. I'm not really sure what kind of an animal it is, but it's very interesting. And I used the same fabric on the binding. Sometimes I will use that same fabric because the back looks very smooth then, and the dark blue frames the top very nicely. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That would really help us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today, I'm going to show you how to make a pattern called Daydreaming. This is a Cozy Quilt Designs pattern from Daniela Stout, and it takes a fat quarter bundle and it takes a background. So I've got mine picked out and I'm all ready to get started. Now, the nice thing about Cozy Quilt Designs patterns is they have lots of sizes. So this has 4 different sizes. I'm going to make the throw size, and it takes 11 fat quarters. Now my bundle here, it's got a few more than 11, but I'm going to pick out the 11 I like the best and use those. Now, because my background is light, I'm going to want to pick some darker prints so we've got enough contrast. These are from Riley Blake Designs. It's called Garden Party, and they're nice and flowery. I really like them, so that would be a really good one. That's beautiful. I'm going to try to get a variety of colors, so let's get one or two of these aquas, a nice lime green. I'll probably skip these light ones and keep them for another project. We'll get a couple of pinks. I've got my 11 fat quarters picked out here, and I always start by unfolding these and ironing them nice and flat, because if you don't, you can't get accurate cuts. Everything is ironed nice and flat, and it's all ready to be cut up. Now, because this is not my pattern, this is from Cozy Quilt Designs, I can't give you all the exact cutting sizes, but I've made so many of their patterns. They're very, very easy to follow. So all of the sizes you need to cut will be very clearly written in the pattern. Just as a side note, anytime I'm going to make a pattern, I always flip through the instructions first, so I have a general idea of what I'm going to be doing. And sometimes there's new ways of doing things or new techniques that I haven't tried before, and I always think, ooh, that looks a little scary, I'm not sure about that. But then I just trust that the pattern is going to tell me how to make the blocks or how to get the patchwork sewn together. And then I'm so happy when I did it, because I've learned something new, and then I get a nice quilt out of it. Everything is all cut out now, and we're going to take our two long strips here over to the machine and get started sewing. Now take one background strip and one printed strip and put them right sides together. And we're going to make a strip tube, so I'm going to sew all the way down one side using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now I'm just going to flip it over and stitch down the other side. Now I'm going to go ahead and do that with all of my strips here, so I get a lot of these strip tubes. So once all those are done, we now have a bunch of little tubes here. So we're going to take the tube and we're going to use something called a strip tube ruler. If you don't have the strip tube ruler, the pattern will give you instructions for cutting without this, but this does make it real easy. Now we're going to take the 3.5 inch line here, and we're going to put that line on our stitching line. So I'm going to put it all the way down at this end on the stitching line, and then I'm going to get my rotary cutter and I'm going to make 2 cuts. So what we've got now is a 1/2 square triangle, and it was cut after it was stitched, so it's exactly the right size. So we're going to cut those 1/2 square triangles out of the whole tube. So now we're going to flip the strip tube ruler over. We're going to again use the 3.5 inch line on the stitching line, and we're going to make another cut. So keep flipping the ruler and cutting more triangles until you have cut up the whole tube. The next step is to iron the 1/2 square triangles open. So I like to put the background print down on my ironing board and then kind of peel it open, press it a little bit with my fingers, then use a dry iron and then some steam. The last step is to cut off any dog ears. Now, some of them won't have dog ears on both sides. They will only have a dog ear on one corner because the other one got cut off when we were cutting our tube up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with all of these guys, and then we'll be ready to move on. So from here, we have 2 blocks that we're going to make, and those 2 blocks will later combine to make a bigger block that will make the whole quilt. So the first block, we need 2 of these half square triangles, and this is mix and match style. You just pick different ones. We have 1 plain corner there, and then we have 1 print. So let's take this over to the machine and I'll show you how to sew it together. Here's what I like to do. I'm going to stitch these 2 seams. So I'm going to flip both of these over, and I'm going to stitch this first and leave it on the machine. Then I'm going to slide the other pair over, get the edges lined up. Now they're kind of stuck together, and that helps me keep them from getting spun around. Now I'm going to finger press the seam allowances. So the bottom one, I'm going to press it to the right. So I'm just going to kind of smash it. I'm not going to stretch it by pulling my finger down there because this is bias and it might stretch. Now the top seam allowance, I'm going to go in the opposite direction. And again, I'm just going to squish it a little bit. Now I'm going to put these right sides together, and the seam allowances there are going in opposite directions, and that's going to make it real easy to get those to line up, and they're kind of nesting because they're going in opposite directions. So we'll line up that corner and stitch again using a careful 1/4 inch seam. And then we are going to finger press the seam allowance this direction. Again, I'm not going to stretch it. I'm just going to pat it down just a little bit so nothing gets distorted. So even though it's been finger pressed, we're going to want to iron it. And because these blocks here are biased, you have to be kind of careful when you iron, because if you start stretching it, you will distort it. So just flatten it a little with your hand, and just gently make sure that you don't stretch this as you sew. Give it a little steam then. Now the second block needs matching pieces, a square and a rectangle that match, and then 1 half square triangle that just has a different print. So let's stitch this seam first. And we'll press that seam toward the darker print there, away from the background. And now we'll stitch this long seam. And this seam allowance, it's going to go toward that print there again, away from the background. Again, I'm going to press this carefully so I don't stretch this here. Once you've got all those done, take 2 of the first kind of blocks and 2 of the second kind of blocks and head back over to the sewing machine. Here's how these get laid out. The lights are going to go in the middle there, and the darks are going to go in the middle here. So I'm going to, again, stitch here and here, leave it on the machine. So I'm going to flip those over, slide this right under without spinning it. And look, these seam allowances here, they're going in opposite directions. They're going to match up and nest, and we will be able to get that intersection just perfect right there. And then slide the second set right over, and again, that intersection, they're also going in opposite directions, making it really easy to match. And now we will finger press these in opposite directions. So let's go towards the dark here and open this one up, and also go towards the dark, which is in the opposite direction. and stitch this one last seam. So there's nothing to match in the middle here. There's no intersection in the back there. We only have to match right in the middle. Same thing here. There's no intersection in here. Just go all the way down. Take this over to the ironing board and give it one last press. All right, the block is all done. Now it's a little hard to tell from the pattern here, but this whole quilt is made with one block. It's made with this block. They're just turned different ways to get the whole pattern. So all we're going to have to do now is finish up the rest of these blocks, and then we can lay out the whole quilt. I've got all the blocks done, and now we can lay out the quilt. Now, every block is the same, but when we lay them out, we're going to lay one with the white parts aiming that way, and the next one is just going to be spun 90 degrees. This one like that, and the next one spun. So I'm going to go ahead and get this laid out. Every other one is going to be spun 90 degrees, and then we will start to see the pattern, and then we will switch some of the blocks around so that we don't have any matchups. So now we're starting to see the secondary pattern pop out. So we've got a couple things going here. We've got a big square here with a diamond in the middle. And then we've got 4 squares coming together here. And so right now, I think I have it all laid out, yes, the way the blocks are supposed to go. But I don't think I want to have 2 blues and 2 pinks here. So now I'm going to start trading some blocks around. So this takes a little bit of doing. So I'm going to take out one of these pinks, and let's see, let's put something that's green right here. This part is looking better, but I don't want 2 oranges. So let's take that blue out, and maybe we'll put this color there. So I'm going to keep trading things around till I like what these big blocks look like, and hopefully I'll get 4 different colors in here. It's not critical, but I do like to have a lot of color change there if I can. Now I have all the blocks in the order that I want them to be laid out in. And so I've got 4 different colors on every one of these big blocks. And I don't have too many places where fabrics are touching, where they're the same fabric. I've got one here or here. They're close. But basically what I want to do is even out the colors. The blue, the navy blue, is very prominent, so I want it spread evenly throughout the quilt. The orange also, it's pretty prominent. So I lay it out and I stand back and squint a little bit and take a look and see if it looks very even. And this is looking pretty good. So I'm going to sew this bottom row, then I'll make all the other rows and sew those rows together. I'm going to put a couple of borders on it and then get it on the quilting machine. I've got the quilt all loaded up on the machine, and I need to pick a thread color to quilt in. Really, any of these colors would work. So all of these are light enough that they're not going to show very much on that background. That pink just blends right in. You can't see it at all. The blue maybe shows a little bit. I like the green. I'm surprised at how much I like the green. But I think that this nice peachy color will look the best. For the quilting pattern, I'm going to use one called Merrily. It has flowers and leaves, and I'm going to do it in kind of a large scale because there's big flowers in some of the prints, and I think that will look really nice on the quilt. The daydreaming quilt is all done. I'm so happy with how it turned out. This is one of those projects that looked better and better each step of the way, and I think the border around there in that nice big floral print looks really good. The quilting really doesn't show. I thought the flowers might show a little more, but it's really receding in there. Now on the back side, you can kind of see the flowers there because I used a nice small print there. For the binding, I just took a couple of my extra fat quarters and I cut those up into binding. So this one happens to be the same as the border. This one's a little different, this one's a little different, and it matches very nicely, but it's a good way to use those extra fat quarters up because, you know, the fat quarter bundles come in all different sizes and they don't necessarily match up with the amount you need for the quilt you're making. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That would really help us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today, I'm going to show you how to make a Drunkard's Path quilt. These are Drunkard's Path blocks. It has one simple curve in it. And the nice thing is, once you have a bunch of these blocks done, you can lay them out to make circles, flowers, leaves, and I'm going to show you how to make all those different shapes with this one simple block. You do need templates to make Drunkard's Path blocks. I'm using this set, Cut Right, Slit and Sew, and they have little slits, and it makes it really easy to get your curves lined up. To get started, we need some 5-inch squares. I'm going to use some fat quarters here. These are Hoffman Batiks, but you can use 5-inch charm squares. You can use layer cakes. You just need to cut some 5-inch squares. We've got some squares and we're ready to cut them with our template. But before we cut, the template set comes with this handy grabber material. It feels a lot like sandpaper. And I'm going to cut a little piece off with my bad scissors that I don't use for fabric. And there's some stickiness on here. You can peel away part of it. And then this part is sticky. And I'm going to put it on the back side just right here. And that way when we set this template on the square, it tends to not move because that holds it in place. All we have to do is cut right along this curve. And I'm using a smaller cutter here. I'm using the 45 millimeter size. It's a little bit smaller and it's a little easier to get around those curves. The next step is these slits here. I find it easiest to mark them. So I'm just going to make a small pencil mark right along each of these slits. And I'm in the seam allowance. I'm not drawing beyond that 1/4 inch. You can try taking your cutter and cutting the slits with your cutter. But I find that a little bit tricky. So I like to mark it first and then just take some little scissors and make a small cut. Keep that cut within the seam allowance, so it's about 1/8 of an inch, and just snip each one of those little marks that you made. Those pieces are cut and marked. The next step is to cut some background. Now for the background, I like to cut 6-inch squares. I like to cut the squares bigger because it'll be more efficient to get this piece out of a 6-inch square than if we were doing just a 5-inch. You can cut multiple layers if you want. I've just got 2 here and I think I can cut those successfully at the same time. And I'm lining up this line, the 4 3/4 inch placement line, on the edge of the square, holding it down, and then we're going to cut here, and this is where you really need the smaller cutter. The bigger cutter, the 60 millimeter, which I normally use, just won't navigate that interior curve very well. I'm switching to a chalk pencil here and making just a little mark so I can see to make those snips. Because we used a 6-inch square, we can spin this around and cut another piece on the scrap that we have left over. We're still going to have a scrap left from the middle, and I'm going to try to come up with some project that will use these nice petal-shaped pieces that we have from the leftovers. Here's how we stitch these together. Take one of these guys and one of the printed ones, and this one goes on the top, and we are lining up the top edges right here and at the very top right now, and we're going to take a couple of stitches. So we're using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and just take a couple stitches. Now all we're going to do is curve this bottom piece that way and the top piece that way as we're sewing. So these little slits that we made, we're lining those up as we go. So you can see those slits. See where this slit is here? We want this to hit that little slit there. So all you have to do is stitch a couple of stitches and keep moving the bottom piece to the left and the top piece to the right. And it feels a little awkward at first, but just trust that if you line those slits up, the pieces are going to go. So I'm trying to keep the 1/4 inch right here. It doesn't matter what's going on down here. It's right here that you want everything lined up. So just keep stitching slow and moving both pieces as you go, and hopefully when you get to the end, everything will line up like that. And it looks a little messy because it does stretch a little as you're sewing. The seam allowance is going to go toward the curved piece, and I find that if I just squish it like this, it helps not distort it. Once we take this over to the ironing board, we're going to make sure it's square, and then we're going to trim it off. So if it doesn't look perfect right now, that's okay. What we want is a 1/4 inch left on this black here and here, and we want to try to keep those straight. So I'm just going to kind of ease it back so that it looks square, and then iron it a little bit. Line up this dark color on the lines on your cutting board here and trim it to 4.5 inches. So we're only trimming a little bit off of here and then a little bit off of here. And our block is now exactly square, and it was very easy to stitch up. I have plenty of blocks done now, and I also went ahead and cut some 4.5 inch squares from the prints and a few 4.5 inch from the background, and let's have some fun. There are so many things you can make. Of course, you can put together circles. So if we put 4 of these together, we will make a circle, but we can add around that. We can make something that looks like a flower. And I'm not worrying about the colors right now. I am just trying to get the blocks placed. So now we've got the center of the flower, and we've got the petals around the edges, and then we could fill in with some background squares. We can also take blocks and make a leaf block. So we'll take 2 rounds, and then we'll take 2 squares. And when you stitch that all together, you've got a nice leaf. If you simply put all the blocks together, there are almost endless patterns you can make. The blocks are so versatile. So this is more of a traditional Drunkard's Path quilt here, where we make these pathways go in different directions. So what I've got going here is the center of a quilt, and we can keep extending the same pattern as we go around, and it'll get bigger and bigger, and you won't believe all the different interesting shapes you can make just with this one block. Here's another block that looks a lot like a flower, but it's quite a bit more modern looking. So we're going to put those in the center. We're going to put a circle in the center. Then we're going to put plainer blocks around the edge here, and then add a few more of the curved blocks in the corners. So this also looks a little bit like a flower. It's like a big bloom here with the center right there. So the possibilities are almost endless. I'm going to go ahead and lay out a lot of the blocks and pick a layout. There, I haven't switched around the colors at all, but I really like this layout. We've got the big daisy in the middle and then the pathway going around, and it makes kind of a continuous swervy border all the way around. So I'll sew all those blocks together, then I'll put on a small solid black border and then a pieced border with these extra squares here, and I think that'll look just great. It's time to choose a thread color. So I've picked out lots of bright choices here. I would like the thread to show in the black background just a little bit. The orange is probably the boldest choice. Really going to show there, not going to show in the patchwork blocks. This bright green, that will show as well. That will look great. I don't use variegated thread very often. There we go. But this would be a good choice. I like the way the blue is showing there. That would be nice. Now, if you don't want the thread to show, this would be the best option because it's not going to show in the black, and it's not going to show very much even in the lightest patchwork there. But I really think this is the color I'm going to use. It's a nice, bright pink, and I don't often show you the back that I've picked, but the back here, it's a pinkish purplish batik. And so I do keep in mind what color is the back, how will the thread look on the back, and this will look the best on the back as well as looking great on the top. For the quilting, I'm using a pattern called Fidget. It's very abstract and it's just one long line curving all over, and I think that will look good on the Drunkard's Path patchwork. I've got the Drunkard's Path quilt all done. This is what I would call a wall hanging size. You could also use it for a baby quilt or a small throw. It's about 44 by 52 inches. Very happy with the quilting. That pink thread doesn't show very much, but I love the windiness of all that quilting there. And the back side, you can't see the quilting at all because there's so much going on in the print, but the color of this matches the top very nicely. I put these squares all the way around the outside. I put a 2.5 inch cut size border here, so everything fit very easily. It's very easy to make this from charm squares, fat quarters, or layer cakes because you're basically starting with 5 inch squares for all of these guys, and these were just cut down to 4.5 inches. I wanted to give you a couple of hints for when you stitch your blocks together. If you're putting two together like this, the seam allowances, they're not nesting, they're both going the same way, so it's a little bit thick. It's a little bit hard to get those lined up perfectly, but you can do it. Also, when you stitch this way, you are just skating along the edge of that seam right there because you want your circles to be very close together but not necessarily overlapping. Let me show you what I mean. So right here, my intersection came together perfectly. They're just about lined up exact. Let me find one where it's not perfect. This one right here is not perfect. The green one is up a little bit farther than the purple side. Now, when you make your own quilt, Don't point out the flaws like this. If it doesn't bother you too much, just let it go. It doesn't bother me. And here's where these come together here. You want them just to meet right at the intersection there. If they overlap a little, it's not going to make the quilt look bad. I'm just showing you so that you can improve your skills for when you make your quilt. Remember, quilting, it's a hobby. You can be as picky as you like, or you can let things go. You get to make it to your own standard, and that's one of the nicest joys of quilting. One more tip. We used our template, the slits in here, to mark little slits that we made in the fabric. You don't have to cut it. You can use a pencil or a chalk pencil. The slits don't make it so easier. They're simply so that you can mark everything to get it matched up easy. Remember those extra little pieces we got when we were cutting out the black? We had scraps that looked like this. I drew a little leaf template, then I traced that onto fusible material here, and I cut out these leaves and I fused them onto the squares. Now these squares, you could use them in your border, so if you want, you could substitute some of your border squares for something like that. I decided to make a pillow with some of them. So these are fused onto the background, and I don't think you can see it, but I just did a raw edge applique on there. So I just used a straight stitch right around the edges. You can use a decorative stitch, you can use a zigzag stitch, but they're going to stay on there. This is just 4 of those squares, a border around it, and look how nice that looks with the quilt. It matches perfectly, nice and cheerful and bright. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today, I'd like to show you how to make a pattern called Brighter Side. This is a pattern from Cozy Quilt Designs, and it uses fat quarters. I've got a nice colorful group here from Henry Glass called Nana May, and they're 1930s style fabrics, and they will look really good with a nice clear white background. One nice thing about Cozy's patterns is they come with multiple sizes. I'm going to make the twin size, so it calls for 15 fat quarters. My bundle has 20, so I'm going to pick out ones that I like and use the rest for the binding. I'm going to set these aside and we'll use them later for binding. And these are what we'll cut our patchwork from. Now the pattern shows us 2 different methods for making half square triangles, and I'm going to show you both methods. The first one, we're going to cut some strips out of the prints, and we're going to cut some strips out of the background, and we're going to make some tubes. I have several of the strips here I'm taking to the sewing machine. I can't give you all the sizes because it's not my pattern, but Cozy Quilts Designs patterns, they're very, very easy to follow. The first thing I'm going to do is cut these background strips in half so that they're the same length as the fat quarter strips. Then we're going to make a tube with 1 background and 1 print, and stitch down both sides using a 1/4 inch seam from the edge. Flip it around and stitch down the other side. And then do the same thing with these wider pieces. To cut these strips into squares, we're going to use something called the strip tube ruler. This is a template from Cozy Quilt Designs, and it's got all these lines marked, and we're going to use the 5.5 inch line, and we're going to put that on our wider strip set, our strip tube here. We're going to put that line on the stitching line, not on the raw edge, on the stitching line, and we're going to cut on both sides of the triangle. Now flip the template around, put the same 5.5-inch line on that stitching line on the top there and cut another triangle. Now we're going to continue flipping and cutting, and every time we cut one of these, we get a half square triangle. On this smaller tube, we're going to use the 3-inch line. It's that solid line there. Again, I'm putting it on the stitching line and cutting both sides. And you may notice that there may be a little teeny bit of stitching still on the top there, but that will come right out. So I'm going to finish cutting the rest of the triangles out of this strip. Here's the small half square triangle. The advantage to using this method is it goes very quick and the pieces are cut exactly to the size you need. You know that is exactly 5.5 inches square. The downside is there's a little bit of waste, and this is all bias. It's bias the whole way, so you have to be a little careful when you iron it. You could possibly spray starch all of your pieces before you cut them. I personally don't like spray starch very much, but some people find it is very, very helpful. So the plus sides, it's very quick, it's very accurate. The downsides, there's a little bit of waste and you have to be careful to not stretch it. It's pretty easy to iron these squares. Put the light fabric down and then peel it open. That way the seam allowances will always go towards the darker fabric. These little pieces that stick off the end here, they're called dog ears. And I always like to trim those off so we have less bulk and the square is nice and neat. The second method involves cutting our fabric into squares, the more traditional way of making half square triangles. So the sizes are different than we cut our first strips, but we'll get these cut out and I'll show you what to do next. I'm going to mark the back side of these squares right along the diagonal, and I like to use a light pencil line for these. Put one of the background squares on top of one of your printed squares, line everything up, and then stitch a 1/4 inch away from this line. We're going to stitch on both sides. My presser foot is almost a 1/4 inch wide, so I can just go right down the edge there and then spin it around to go down the other side. For the small squares, we'll use exactly the same method. All we have to do is cut right along that drawn line, and we will have 2 half square triangles from each of these. The advantage to making the half square triangles like this is that the grain is straight. The grain is straight both ways, and we were able to get 2 at a time, and there was literally no waste. The only downside is it's a little bit slower to make them this way than when we're doing the strip tubes. So you can definitely try both methods. You can even try both methods in the same quilt and see which method you like better. I've gone ahead and made all of the half square triangles. I'm going to take 2 of the big ones, we'll get 2 different colors, and then we'll get 8 of these little ones, and we'll head back to the machine. The block layout is really easy. We're going to point the dark colors, all of them, facing this way. So you can mess around with what fabric goes where so you have a nice color blend, but each block is facing exactly the same way with the color going towards this bottom corner. I think the easiest way to put this together is to put these 4 blocks together and put these 4 blocks together. So I'm going to slide them over here so they're a little closer to my sewing machine needle here, and we'll flip these 2 right sides together stitch along this edge here. And we'll press the seam allowances in opposite directions. I'm going to press this bottom one toward the dark color there, and here is where you want to be a little careful because my little triangles here, they're all biased, so you have to be careful you don't stretch that seam. I'm finger pressing it, but I'm just pressing down on it, I'm not stretching it. Now when we put these two pieces together, the seam, the intersection in the middle there, the seam allowances are going in opposite directions, and it makes it really easy to get them matched. It's also very easy to sew with these pieces because they give a little because they are biased. So that is another benefit to using the squares from the tubes. And let's press this toward that darker color, again being a little careful that you don't stretch it. We're ready to put the block together. Let's put that right sides together, that right sides together. We'll slide them over here. And I'm going to press toward the dark color here. And for this seam, I'm going to press towards the light because we have all these intersections here, and that really wants to go that way. And I always like to finger press things in the directions they would like to go in. And that does have the effect of putting them opposite directions there. So this one will also be real easy to stitch up. There, that's the whole block. So I'm going to go ahead, we'll get these little threads trimmed off and make up all the rest of the blocks so we can get ready to lay this quilt out. The blocks are all done and we're ready to lay out the quilt. The layout's pretty easy. The first row, when you think of the color here, it's going to go down in the right corner. And the next block, it's going to go up in the right corner. So we're going to keep alternating that row, first row like that, down to the right, up to the right. And I'm not going to worry about what color is where right now. I'm just going to put them in the correct rotation. The second row, it's just the opposite. We're going to go up to the left and then down to the left. And we're going to keep doing that for the whole second row. The third row is exactly the same as the first row, so you can always look down here to see which way to turn the pieces. There, that's the last block. And the colors are actually pretty well balanced throughout the quilt. The only trading I might do would be where I've got two blues coming together, and I actually like where I've got a little pinwheel of yellow here and here and here. I might trade around so that I have a few more of those yellow pinwheels. I think that looks pretty good. Sewing the rows together and getting the whole quilt will be real easy because the blocks are nice and big. And then I'm going to add the borders and then the whole top will be done. The brighter side quilt is all done. I made the twin size. It's 72 by 92. And the pattern does have instructions that go all the way up to a king. And I think it's 110 by 110 inches. I have blocks here, some of which are straight grain, mainly the big ones. And then these ones are all on the diagonal. They're all in the bias grain. But the quilt, even though it's not quilted yet, this is just the top, it's pretty flat. It was pretty easy to get flat, pretty easy to line everything up. And I love how I happened to get these pinwheels, these yellow pinwheels. I was able to turn the blocks so those pinwheels show up, and I think that brightens up the quilt quite nicely. I love this little skinny border on it. Then we've got a bigger border, so that gives you an opportunity to put a color on the outside, so it makes the quilt look more blue because we've got blue here. If you wanted more pink, you could put a pink border on. And this is a pattern that would look good in almost any color combination. Here's some options for thread colors, and you certainly could use solid white on. You certainly could use white on here. It wouldn't show in that solid white at all. The colors that I've got, they're all pretty pale, and I don't think any of them will fight with the patchwork, and I think I would probably go with this nice light yellow. One more thing I wanted to share with you. Remember the extra fat quarters we had? The bundle had more fat quarters than we needed, so I cut all these up, and this is going to be my binding. It's all compatible. It's the same colors that are in there, and I like having the binding with different colors. That will really frame the quilt quite nicely. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting!